The old clock on the wall showed 8:45 p.m. when Rosa pushed her cleaning cart through the heavy wooden doors of the Riverside Music Academy. Her back ached from the long day, but she didn't mind. This was her favorite job, even though it paid the least. The building was almost empty now. Students had gone home hours ago, their laughter and chatter replaced by a peaceful silence. Only the faint sound of a violin could be heard from somewhere upstairs, probably a dedicated student squeezing in extra practice time. Rosa had been cleaning these halls for 3 years now. Every marble floor, every brass doorknob, every corner of this beautiful old building had become familiar to her. But it wasn't the architecture that made her love this place. It was the music. She started her evening routine on the 3rd floor just like always. Dust the trophy cases, mop the practice room floors, empty the trash bins filled with crumpled sheet music and broken pencils. The work was simple, repetitive, and gave her mind space to wander. As she cleaned, Rosa thought about her daughter's upcoming birthday. 15 years old already. Time had flown by so fast. She mentally calculated her budget, figuring out if she could afford that sweater her daughter had been eyeing at the department store. Maybe if she skipped buying new shoes for herself this month. Life hadn't always been this tight. Rosa had grown up in a different world, in a small city back in Colombia where her father ran a music shop. Her childhood home had always been filled with melodies. Piano, guitar, violin. Her father sold them all and could play each one beautifully. When Rosa turned 7, her father brought home an old upright piano. "For you, mi amor," he had said with that warm smile of his. "I see how you watch the customers play. I see your fingers move. It's time." Those lessons with her father were some of her happiest memories. Every evening after school, she would sit at that piano for hours. Her father was patient but demanding. "Feel the music here," he would say, tapping his chest. "Not just your fingers. Your heart must play too." By the time she was 16, Rosa had won several regional competitions. Her teacher at the conservatory said she had real talent, the kind that could take her places. She dreamed of concert halls and symphonies, of playing music that would move people to tears. But life, as it often does, had different plans. Her father got sick when she was 19. The medical bills piled up quickly. They sold the music shop, then most of the instruments. Eventually, even her beloved piano had to go. Rosa dropped out of the conservatory to work full-time, helping her mother care for her father. He passed away the following spring. A year later, Rosa met Diego at her cousin's wedding. He was kind, hard-working, and made her laugh when she thought she'd forgotten how. They married within months. He worked construction, she worked as a secretary. They were happy, even if money was always tight. Then came the children. First her son, Miguel. Then 2 years later, her daughter, Isabella. Rosa threw herself into motherhood with the same passion she'd once poured into music. She sang lullabies, made up silly songs, and danced with her babies in the kitchen. When Miguel was 5, they made the difficult decision to move to the United States. Diego's brother had found good work there and promised to help them get started. The journey was hard, expensive, and scary, but they made it. Life in America was harder than they'd imagined. The language barrier was frustrating. Diego's construction skills didn't translate without proper certifications. Rosa's secretarial experience meant nothing without perfect English. They took whatever work they could find. Rosa cleaned houses. Diego worked warehouse jobs. They lived in a tiny apartment with Diego's brother and his family. 5 adults and 3 children in a 2-bedroom space. It was cramped and chaotic, but they were together. Then, 8 years ago, Diego died in a workplace accident, a forklift malfunction. Wrong place, wrong time. Just like that, Rosa became a widow with 2 young children and barely enough English to navigate the complex world of insurance claims and legal paperwork. The settlement money helped for a while, but Rosa knew it wouldn't last forever. She worked 3 different cleaning jobs, rarely seeing her children except on Sundays. Miguel, only 12 at the time, became the man of the house. He helped Isabella with homework, made simple dinners, and never complained. Eventually, Rosa had to cut back to 2 jobs as her body started protesting the brutal schedule. That's when she found the opening at Riverside Music Academy. The pay was modest, but the hours were better. Evening work meant she could at least see her children in the mornings before school. She never told anyone at the academy about her past. Who would care that the cleaning lady once played Rachmaninoff? It seemed almost embarrassing now, looking at her rough, calloused hands that smelled of cleaning products no matter how many times she washed them. But oh, how she loved being surrounded by music again. Every evening, as she cleaned, Rosa would hear the students practice. Some were brilliant, their fingers dancing across the keys with confidence and skill. Others were clearly beginners, stumbling through scales and simple melodies. She smiled at those ones, remembering her own early struggles. Sometimes she wanted to knock on the practice room doors and offer advice. Slow down on that passage, she'd think. Feel the rhythm in your body first, then let your hands follow. But of course she never did. She was just the cleaning lady. The best part of her shift came around 9 o'clock when she reached the main concert hall. This magnificent room with its perfect acoustics and gleaming grand piano was always the last place she cleaned. By then the building was completely empty. Rosa had a ritual. She would stand at the back of the hall, close her eyes, and remember. She'd imagine herself on that stage young again, dressed in a beautiful gown, playing for a captivated audience. She could almost hear the applause, feel the joy of music flowing through her. Then she'd open her eyes, pick up her mop, and get back to work. Tonight felt different somehow. Maybe it was the stillness in the air, or the way moonlight streamed through the tall windows, casting silver shadows across the empty seats. Rosa finished mopping the aisles and wiping down the chairs faster than usual. She stood there at the edge of the stage, looking at the piano. A beautiful Steinway, probably worth more than she'd earn in 5 years. The polished black surface reflected the dim stage lights like a mirror. Her feet moved before her brain could stop them. Rosa climbed the 3 steps onto the stage. Her heart pounded as she approached the piano. This was against the rules. She knew that. Cleaning staff weren't supposed to touch the instruments, but she was so close now. Just a few more steps. Rosa reached out slowly, her fingertips barely grazing the smooth wood of the piano's case. It felt cool and perfect under her touch. She moved to the keyboard, her hand hovering just above the keys. What would it feel like? After so many years, so much loss, so much sacrifice, what would it feel like to play again? She pressed down on a single key. Middle C. The note rang out pure and clear in the empty hall, and suddenly Rosa was crying. 23 years of buried dreams came flooding back in that one simple note. She pressed another key. Then another. Her fingers remembered what her heart had never forgotten. What do you think you're doing? The voice cut through the silence like a knife. Rosa spun around, her face going pale with fear. Standing in the doorway was Professor Chen, the academy's most feared piano instructor. And he did not look happy. Rosa's hands flew away from the piano keys as if they'd been burned. Her cleaning cart was 20 feet away, abandoned near the stage steps. She felt her face flush hot with embarrassment and fear. "I'm so sorry, Professor Chen," she stammered, her accent thicker when she was nervous. I didn't mean to." Professor Chen stood in the doorway, his briefcase in one hand and his coat draped over his other arm. He was a thin man in his late 50s with sharp features and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Students whispered that he could hear a wrong note from 3 floors away. They also said he'd made more than one talented pianist cry during lessons. Rosa had seen him around the academy, of course. He always walked quickly, never making small talk with anyone. The other cleaning staff warned her to stay out of his way. "That one's got no patience for mistakes," her co-worker Linda had said. Cold as ice. Now those ice-cold eyes were fixed directly on Rosa. "You didn't mean to what?" Professor Chen asked, stepping into the concert hall. His footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. "Touch the piano? Play a note? Or get caught?" Rosa felt her throat tighten. She needed this job desperately. Miguel was applying to colleges next year. Isabella needed braces. "The rent was going up again next month. Please, sir," she said quietly. "I know I shouldn't have touched it. It won't happen again. I promise." She hurried toward the stage steps, ready to grab her cart and disappear, but Professor Chen's voice stopped her. "Wait. It wasn't a request. It was a command." Rosa froze halfway down the steps. She turned slowly to face him, her heart hammering in her chest. Was he going to report her? Would she be fired tonight? Professor Chen walked closer, studying her face with an intensity that made Rosa want to look away. But she forced herself to meet his gaze. Her father had taught her that. "Stand tall, mi amor. Never be ashamed of who you are." Those 3 notes you played, Professor Chen said slowly. They weren't random. Rosa blinked in confusion. Sir? The way you touched the keys. The way your hand positioned itself over the keyboard. He tilted his head slightly. That wasn't curiosity. That was muscle memory. Rosa's mouth went dry. She didn't know what to say. Professor Chen set his briefcase down on one of the concert hall seats. He draped his coat carefully over the seat back, then turned to face her fully. You're the evening cleaner. I've seen you around for, what, a few years now? 3 years, sir. 3 years, he repeated. And in all that time, I never really looked at you. Isn't that interesting? We pass people every day and never truly see them. Rosa wasn't sure if she was supposed to respond to that. She remained silent, gripping the stage railing tightly. Professor Chen walked toward the piano, running his hand along its polished surface. This instrument costs about $180,000. Do you know why? Because it's very good quality? Rosa offered weakly. Because it's perfect, he corrected. Every hammer, every string, every tiny piece is precisely calibrated. When you touch these keys, they respond with absolute accuracy. They tell the truth. He looked up at her. So when I heard those 3 notes just now, I heard truth. Someone who knows how to touch a piano properly touched this one. Rosa felt tears pricking at her eyes. She blinked them back stubbornly. I used to play, she admitted quietly, a long time ago. In Colombia, before I came here. Used to play? Professor Chen repeated flatly. What does that mean? You took lessons as a child? You played in school? I studied at the conservatory in Cali for 3 years. The words felt strange coming out. Rosa hadn't spoken about this to anyone in years. I had to stop when my father got sick. Professor Chen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Interest, maybe. Or suspicion. The conservatory, he said. So you weren't just plinking out Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star for fun. You had serious training. Yes, sir. How long has it been since you played? Rosa did the math quickly in her head. 23 years, maybe 24. And you've been working here, cleaning this building, surrounded by pianos and music students for 3 years? Yes. That must have been. Professor Chen paused, seeming to search for the right word. Difficult, Rosa let out a shaky breath. Sometimes. But it also makes me happy. To hear the music again. To be near it. Even if you can't play it yourself. Even then. They stood in silence for a moment. Rosa could hear the old building settling around them. The distant hum of the heating system. The faint sound of traffic from the street outside. Professor Chen walked to the piano bench and sat down. He played a quick scale, his fingers moving with effortless precision. Then he stood up and looked directly at Rosa. Sit, he said, gesturing to the bench. Rosa felt her stomach drop. Sir, I really should get back to— Sit, he repeated, firmer this time. That's not a request. Rosa's hands trembled as she climbed back up the stage steps. This was insane. She was going to get fired for sure. But something in Professor Chen's voice made it impossible to refuse. She sat down carefully on the bench, her cleaning uniform feeling suddenly very shabby and out of place. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with hands that still smelled like floor cleaner, despite the gloves she wore. I can't, sir, she said quietly. It's been too long. I don't remember. Your hands remember, Professor Chen interrupted. I saw them hover over those keys. Your fingers were already finding their positions before you even touched them. He crossed his arms. Play something, anything. Rosa stared at the keys. 88 black and white rectangles that had once been as familiar to her as her own children's faces. Now they looked foreign, almost frightening. I'm very out of practice, she whispered. I'll make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, Professor Chen said. That's not what I'm listening for. Rosa's mind raced through her old repertoire. What could she still play? What would her fingers remember? Most of the complicated pieces were gone, buried under years of neglect. But maybe something simple, something her heart knew even if her hands had forgotten. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then her fingers found the keys. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the concert hall. They were shaky at first. Her timing was off. Her fingers stumbled over passages that she used to play in her sleep. She missed notes and had to start phrases over. It was rusty and imperfect and probably painful to listen to for someone like Professor Chen. But as she played, something incredible happened. The music started coming back to her. Not just the notes, but the feeling. That indescribable sensation of pouring your soul out through your fingertips. The way a melody could carry emotions too deep for words. The way a simple chord progression could tell a story of longing, loss, and hope. Rosa forgot about her uniform. She forgot about Professor Chen watching her. She forgot about her aching back and her worried calculations about next month's bills. For these few precious minutes, she was just a person playing music, connecting with something pure and true that she'd thought was lost forever. When the last note faded away, Rosa sat perfectly still. Tears were running down her face, but she didn't care. Her hands rested gently on the keys, trembling slightly. The silence in the concert hall felt enormous. Finally, Rosa opened her eyes and looked up at Professor Chen. She expected to see disappointment or annoyance. Instead, his face showed something she couldn't quite read. "Again," he said quietly. "Play it again. And this time don't apologize for the mistakes." Rosa wiped her tears quickly with the back of her hand. Play it again? She had barely made it through once. Her fingers felt stiff and clumsy. The mistakes had been embarrassing enough the first time. "Professor Chen, I really don't think—" "Stop thinking," he interrupted, his voice sharp but not unkind. "That's your problem. You're thinking about what you can't do instead of feeling what you can do." He walked closer to the piano. "When you played just now, do you know what I heard?" Rosa shook her head, not trusting her voice. "I heard someone who understands music, really understands it. Not just the notes on a page, but what they mean." He paused. "I have students who've trained their whole lives. They can play Rachmaninoff without a single technical error. Perfect pitch, perfect timing, perfect everything. And it sounds like nothing, like a computer playing." Rosa looked up at him, surprised by the frustration in his voice. "But you," Professor Chen continued, "you played with 23 years of life in those notes. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of holding on to something you thought you'd lost. That's not something I can teach." He gestured toward the piano. "So play it again. Stop apologizing. Stop hiding. Just play." Rosa turned back to the keyboard. Her hands were still shaking, but something had shifted inside her. Maybe it was his words. Maybe it was finally letting herself feel this again after so long. Whatever it was, when she placed her fingers on the keys this time, they felt more like home. She began the nocturne again. This time, she didn't stop when she made a mistake. She didn't tense up when her fingers stumbled. She just kept going, letting the music flow through her the way water flows around rocks in a stream. Imperfect, but alive. Real. The melody filled the concert hall, rising and falling like breath. Rosa poured everything into it. The grief of losing her father, the fear of those early days in America, the crushing weight of losing Diego, the fierce love she had for her children, the small joys she'd found in simple things, the dreams she'd buried but never completely let die. Her eyes were closed again, but she could feel the music surrounding her like an embrace. This was why she'd fallen in love with piano as a child. Not for the applause or recognition, but for this feeling, this connection to something bigger than herself. When she reached the final phrases, Rosa let the notes linger, each one soft and deliberate. The last chord faded slowly into silence. She sat there breathing hard as if she'd just run a mile. Her cheeks were wet with fresh tears. "Beautiful," Professor Chen said quietly. Rosa opened her eyes and turned to thank him, but he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the back of the concert hall. Rosa followed his gaze and felt her heart stop. The double doors at the entrance were wide open. And standing there, scattered in the doorway and spilling into the hallway beyond, were people, at least a dozen of them. She recognized Linda, her fellow cleaning staff member, holding her mop and staring with her mouth open. There was Tom from maintenance, still wearing his tool belt. 2 security guards who should have been doing their rounds. Several people she didn't know, probably teachers or administrative staff working late. They had heard her playing. They had all come to listen. Rosa felt panic rise in her chest. She stood up quickly from the bench, nearly knocking it over. "I should go," she said to Professor Chen. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause a disruption." "I need to finish cleaning." "Stay right there," Professor Chen said firmly. Then he raised his voice, addressing the people in the doorway. "Well, are you going to just stand there, or are you going to come in and sit down properly?" There was a moment of hesitation. Then Tom from maintenance walked in first, taking a seat in the back row. Linda followed, sitting beside him. One by one, the others filed in, filling up the back rows of the concert hall. Rosa felt like she might faint. This couldn't be happening. She was the cleaning lady. She was wearing her work uniform with the Academy logo on it. Her hands smelled like disinfectant. These people didn't come here to listen to her. Professor Chen seemed to read her mind. They came because they heard something worth listening to, he said. Then before Rosa could protest, he announced loudly, "She'll play one more piece." "No, please," Rosa whispered urgently. "I can't. Not with people watching. I'm not prepared." "You're never going to be prepared," Professor Chen said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "That's the point. Preparation is what my other students do. You don't need that. You need to remember who you are." Rosa looked at the small audience waiting in the seats. Their faces showed curiosity, kindness, and genuine interest. Linda gave her an encouraging smile. Tom nodded at her. These were her co-workers. People she said hello to every day. People who knew her as Rosa, the cleaning lady. The quiet woman who always had a kind word and never complained. What would they think of her now? Professor Chen walked to the doors of the concert hall. For a moment, Rosa thought he was going to close them and send everyone away. Instead, he propped them open even wider. "In case anyone else wants to listen," he explained. Then he returned to stand beside the piano, his arms crossed, waiting. Rosa sat back down on the bench. Her whole body was trembling now. She looked at her hands, those rough and calloused hands that had scrubbed so many floors, washed so many windows. Could they really make beautiful music again? She thought about her children. Miguel, who worked so hard to help the family while keeping his grades up. Isabella, who had inherited her father's easy smile and her mother's stubbornness. What would they think if they could see her right now? Would they be proud or embarrassed that their mother was making a spectacle of herself? Rosa closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she made a decision. If this was going to be her last time playing before she got fired, she was going to make it count. She chose a piece her father had taught her when she was 15. A traditional Colombian bambuco that had been adapted for piano, something most of these people would never have heard before. Something from her heart, from her home, from the girl she used to be. Her fingers found the keys and she began to play. The rhythm was different from the Chopin. More playful, more alive. It started soft and built slowly like a story being told. The melody danced and swirled, sometimes joyful, sometimes melancholy. It spoke of mountains and coffee plantations, of warm rain and family gatherings, of a homeland she'd left behind but never forgotten. Rosa played with her whole body, swaying slightly with the rhythm. She forgot about being nervous. She forgot about the audience. She even forgot about Professor Chen standing there watching. She was just Rosa again. Rosa who loved music more than anything. Rosa who could speak through piano keys in ways she could never speak with words. The music grew stronger, more confident. Her fingers flew across the keys now, remembering patterns she thought were lost forever. The concert hall's perfect acoustics carried every note clearly, every nuance of feeling. In the back rows, Linda was crying. Tom had closed his eyes, a small smile on his face. The security guard stood perfectly still, captivated. And in the hallway beyond the open doors, more people had gathered. Students who'd been leaving the building. Teachers who'd heard the unfamiliar melody. The administrative assistant from the front desk. They stood quietly, respectfully, listening to something unexpected and beautiful. Rosa built the piece to its final crescendo, her hands strong and sure now. The last notes rang out clear and true, echoing through the hall, then silence. Rosa opened her eyes and looked down at the piano keys, hardly believing what she'd just done. Then the applause started. The applause started as a few scattered claps, then grew into something Rosa had never expected to hear again. Real applause. The kind that comes from people who've just experienced something that moved them. Rosa stood up from the piano bench, her legs wobbly. She didn't know what to do with her hands. Should she bow? That seemed ridiculous in her cleaning uniform. Should she wave? She settled for a small, awkward nod toward the audience. Linda was on her feet now, clapping enthusiastically with tears streaming down her face. "Girl, I had no idea," she called out. "That was incredible." Tom was shaking his head in amazement. "I've been working here for 12 years. he said to the person next to him. Heard hundreds of recitals. That was something special. More people were filtering in from the hallway now, asking what they'd missed. Rosa felt overwhelmed, exposed in a way she'd never felt before. All these eyes on her, all this attention. It was too much. She looked desperately at Professor Chen, silently begging him to end this somehow. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking toward the back of the hall where a tall woman in an elegant pantsuit had just entered. She walked with the kind of confidence that comes from being in charge. Rosa recognized her immediately. Dr. Patricia Bowman, the Academy's director. The woman who signed Rosa's paychecks. The woman who could fire her with a single word. Rosa's stomach dropped. This was it. She was done. Dr. Bowman walked down the center aisle, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. The applause died down as people realized who had entered. The room fell silent. Professor Chen, Dr. Bowman said, her voice carrying easily through the hall. I was working late in my office when I heard music. Very unusual music for this time of night. She looked at Rosa, her expression unreadable. Would someone like to explain what's going on here? Professor Chen stepped forward. Patricia, this is Rosa Gutierrez. She's been on our cleaning staff for 3 years. She also happens to be a conservatory-trained pianist who hasn't played in over 2 decades. Dr. Bowman's eyebrows rose slightly. She studied Rosa for a long moment. Is that so? Rosa found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I'm very sorry, Dr. Bowman. I know I shouldn't have touched the piano. I was just finishing cleaning and I'll accept whatever consequences. Consequences? Dr. Bowman interrupted. She walked closer to the stage. Ms. Gutierrez, I've been the director of this academy for 18 years. In that time, I've heard thousands of performances. Student recitals, faculty concerts, guest artists from around the world. She paused at the foot of the stage, looking up at Rosa. What I just heard from my office was one of the most emotionally authentic pieces of music I've encountered in a very long time. Rosa blinked in surprise. That wasn't what she'd expected to hear. You studied at the conservatory in Cali? Dr. Bowman asked. Yes, ma'am. For 3 years. And you haven't played since? Not on a real piano. Sometimes I practice on a paper keyboard I made, just to remember the finger positions. Rosa felt embarrassed admitting this. I couldn't afford a real one. Dr. Bowman exchanged a glance with Professor Chen. Something passed between them. Some unspoken communication that Rosa couldn't interpret. Professor Chen, Dr. Bowman said, I assume you're about to tell me that we should do something about this situation? I am, he confirmed. This is talent, Patricia. Raw, unpolished, and buried under years of neglect, but it's real talent. The kind we're supposed to be nurturing at this academy. I agree, Dr. Bowman said simply. Rosa looked between them, confused. I don't understand. Dr. Bowman smiled for the first time. Ms. Gutierrez, how would you feel about becoming a student here? The question hung in the air. Rosa was sure she'd misheard. A student? We have a scholarship program for exceptional talents who demonstrate financial need. I think you'd qualify. Dr. Bowman looked at Professor Chen. Would you be willing to take her on as a student? Professor Chen nodded. Under one condition. She keeps her day job for now. She'll need the income, and I think the humility of continuing to work while learning will serve her well. He looked at Rosa. We'll work around your schedule. Early morning lessons before your children wake up. Evening sessions after your shift. It won't be easy, Rosa felt dizzy. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. I can't afford lessons from you, Professor Chen. Even with a scholarship, I'm sure there are costs. The scholarship covers everything, Dr. Bowman said. Tuition, materials, and access to practice rooms. That's what it's designed for. She tilted her head. Unless you're not interested? Not interested. Rosa's voice cracked. I don't know what to say. This is... She looked at the piano, then at the small crowd still gathered in the seats, then back at Dr. Bowman. Yes, I'm interested. More than interested. I just never thought... Good, Professor Chen said briskly. We'll start tomorrow. 5:30 in the morning, practice room 7. Bring your work ethic and leave your excuses at the door. Rosa nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Dr. Bowman addressed the gathered crowd. I think that's enough excitement for one evening. Let's let Ms. Gutierrez finish her work so she can go home to her family. She gave Rosa a warm smile, Welcome to Riverside Music Academy, Ms. Gutierrez. As a student this time. The crowd dispersed slowly, many people stopping to congratulate Rosa or shake her hand. Linda hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "You deserve this." Within minutes, the hall was empty except for Rosa, Professor Chen, and her abandoned cleaning cart. "I should finish my shift," Rosa said, looking at all the work she still had to do. "You should," Professor Chen agreed. "And Ms. Gutierrez? Don't be late tomorrow. I don't tolerate tardiness, even from cleaning ladies who play Chopin." There might have been the tiniest hint of a smile on his face, but Rosa couldn't be sure. After he left, Rosa stood alone in the concert hall. She looked at the piano on the stage, gleaming under the lights. Then she looked at her cleaning cart with its mops and sprays and trash bags. Both felt like they belonged to her now. Both were part of who she was. She finished cleaning the hall carefully, taking her time. When she was done, she allowed herself one more moment at the piano. She played a single scale slowly, savoring each note. Then she packed up her cart and headed home. Her phone buzzed in her pocket as she walked to the bus stop. A text from Miguel. "Mom, where are you? You're usually home by now." "Everything okay?" Rosa smiled as she typed her response. "Everything is more than okay, mijo. I have something amazing to tell you when I get home." She stared at the message for a moment, then added, "Your mother is going back to school." The bus ride home felt different than usual. Rosa stared out the window at the city lights, her mind racing. She thought about her practice schedule, about what she'd need to relearn, about how she'd balance everything with her job and her family. It would be hard. Maybe impossible. But then again, everything in her life had been hard. Coming to a new country had been hard. Raising 2 children alone had been hard. Working 3 jobs while grieving her husband had been hard. She'd survived all of that. She could handle this. When Rosa finally walked through her apartment door at 11 p.m., both her children were waiting up for her. Miguel was at the kitchen table with his homework. Isabella was on the couch with her phone. They both looked up when she entered, concern on their faces. "Mom, you're so late," Isabella said. "We were worried." Rosa set down her bag and looked at her 2 beautiful children. Her whole world. Everything she'd sacrificed for. "Sit down," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Both of you. I need to tell you something." And for the first time in 23 years, Rosa told her children about the girl she used to be, about the piano, about her father, about the dreams she'd had before life changed everything. And then she told them about tonight. Miguel and Isabella listened in stunned silence. When she finished, Isabella spoke first. "Mom," she said quietly, "I don't understand. Why didn't you ever tell us you could play piano?" Rosa thought about that. "Because I didn't think it mattered anymore. That was a different life, a different me. But it's still you," Miguel said. "It was always still you." Rosa felt tears spring to her eyes for what felt like the 100th time that night. "I suppose it was." Isabella jumped up and hugged her mother tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Mom. You're going to be amazing." Miguel joined the hug. "When do you start?" Rosa laughed through her tears. "Tomorrow morning, 5:30 a.m. "That's in like 6 hours," Miguel said, checking his watch. "I know," Rosa said. "I should probably sleep." But she didn't go to bed right away. Instead, she sat with her children and talked. Really talked. About music and dreams and second chances. About how it's never too late to remember who you are. Rosa's alarm went off at 4:45 in the morning. She'd barely slept 3 hours, but she felt more awake than she had in years. Today was her first lesson with Professor Chen. She got ready quietly, trying not to wake her children. But when she came out of the bathroom, Miguel was already in the kitchen making coffee. "You didn't have to get up," Rosa said softly. "I wanted to," Miguel replied, handing her a travel mug. "First day back to school." "That's a big deal, Mom." Rosa hugged her son tightly. "Thank you, mijo." The early morning bus was nearly empty. Rosa rode through the quiet city streets, watching the sunrise paint the sky orange and pink. She thought about all the mornings she'd taken this same route to clean the academy, never imagining she'd one day be going there as a student. Professor Chen was already waiting in practice room 7 when she arrived. He looked as fresh and alert as if it were midday, not 5:30 in the morning. "You're 3 minutes early," he observed. "Good. Sit down." The next hour was the hardest work Rosa had done in years. Professor Chen was demanding, precise, and showed no mercy for her rusty technique. He made her play scales over and over, correcting her finger positions, her posture, her breathing. "No, no, no," he'd say, stopping her mid-scale. "Your wrist is too high." Again. By the end of the lesson, Rosa's fingers ached and her back was sore from holding proper posture. But she felt alive in a way she'd forgotten was possible. "You have a lot of bad habits to unlearn," Professor Chen said as she gathered her things. "But you also have something most of my students lack. You remember why music matters," Rosa smiled. "Same time tomorrow?" "Every day," he confirmed. "Even weekends. If you're serious about this, there's no time to waste." The next few months were the most exhausting and exhilarating of Rosa's life. She'd wake up before dawn for lessons, go home to make breakfast for her children and send them off to school, sleep for a few hours, then head to the academy for her cleaning shift. After work, she'd practice in the empty concert hall until late at night. Linda covered for her sometimes, letting Rosa skip mopping certain floors so she could practice longer. Tom adjusted the maintenance schedule to make sure the concert hall stayed available. Even the security guard started leaving her coffee outside the practice rooms. Word spread beyond the academy. A local newspaper heard about the cleaning lady who discovered she could play again and wrote a small article. Then a TV news station picked up the story. Suddenly, people Rosa had never met were sending her encouraging messages on social media. "You're kind of famous now, Mom," Isabella said one evening, showing her a video someone had posted online. It had over 50,000 views. Rosa felt uncomfortable with the attention. She wasn't doing this to be famous. She was doing it because music was part of her soul, and she'd finally found it again. But the attention brought something unexpected. Donations started coming in, small amounts mostly, from people who were moved by her story. A retired teacher sent $50. A musician from another state sent $100. A grandmother wrote a note saying Rosa inspired her to take up painting again after 30 years. Dr. Bowman set up a fund to hold the money. "It's yours," she told Rosa, "for your children's education or your own needs or whatever you decide." Rosa cried when she saw how much had accumulated. It was enough to cover Miguel's first year of college. Enough to get Isabella those braces. Enough to replace the worn-out shoes Rosa had been meaning to buy for 6 months. 6 months after that first night, Dr. Bowman approached Rosa with an idea. "The spring concert is in 3 weeks, she said. "We usually feature our top students and a guest artist. This year I'd like you to perform." Rosa nearly dropped the mop she was holding. "Me perform in the spring concert? You've worked harder than any student I've seen," Dr. Bowman said. "And your story. People need to hear it. Not just your music, but what it represents. That it's never too late. The dreams don't die, they just wait." Rosa looked at Professor Chen, who'd been standing silently nearby. "You think I'm ready?" "No," he said bluntly. "You're not technically ready. You need years more training to reach the level you had before, much less exceed it." He paused. "But you're ready for this." "There's a difference." Rosa practiced her chosen pieces obsessively for those 3 weeks. She barely slept. Her fingers were calloused in new places. She dreamed in musical notes Miguel and Isabella watched their mother transform. She stood taller now, smiled more easily. Even after 14-hour days of lessons, work, and practice, she seemed to carry less weight on her shoulders. "It's like we got a different mom," Isabella said to her brother one night. "No," Miguel corrected gently. "We got the mom she was always supposed to be." The night of the spring concert arrived. The Academy's concert hall was packed with nearly 300 people. Students, faculty, families, and community members filled every seat. News cameras were set up in the back. Rosa stood backstage in a simple black dress that Dr. Bowman had helped her pick out. Her hands were shaking. She could hear the murmur of the crowd, the rustle of programs, the excitement in the air. Linda appeared beside her, wearing her own best dress. "I got the night off to watch you," she said, squeezing Rosa's hand. "You're going to be wonderful." Professor Chen found her moments before she was supposed to go on. "Remember," he said quietly, "this isn't about being perfect. This is about being real." Rosa nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Dr. Bowman walked onto the stage to introduce her. "Our final performer tonight has a unique story," she began. 6 months ago, she was cleaning this very stage when a chance moment led to a rediscovery of a gift she thought she'd lost forever. Rosa listened from the wings as Dr. Bowman told her story. She heard the audience's murmurs of interest, the sympathetic sighs, the scattered applause. "Please welcome Rosa Gutierrez." Rosa walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, making it hard to see the audience clearly. But she could feel them there, hundreds of people waiting to hear her play. She sat at the piano, the same Steinway she'd been afraid to touch 6 months ago. She adjusted the bench, positioned her hands, and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. She'd chosen 3 pieces for her performance. First, the Chopin Nocturne that had started everything. Second, the Colombian Bambuco that had drawn the crowd that first night. And finally, something she'd composed herself over the past few weeks. She called it The Long Way Home. It was a simple piece, not technically complex, but it told her story in music. The melody spoke of leaving and losing, of working and waiting, of small hopes kept alive in dark times. It built slowly, incorporating elements of both classical training and the folk music of her childhood. It was sad and joyful at once, just like life itself. As Rosa played, she forgot about the cameras and the crowd. She forgot about being nervous. She was back in her father's music shop, playing for the joy of it. She was in her tiny apartment, humming lullabies to her babies. She was pushing her cleaning cart through empty hallways, listening to distant melodies. She was all of these Rosas at once, and the music held all of them. When the final note faded, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the entire audience rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous. Rosa looked out at the crowd and saw her children in the 3rd row, both crying and clapping. She saw Linda and Tom and the security guards. She saw Dr. Bowman nodding with satisfaction. She saw Professor Chen standing in the wings with his arms crossed, but there was definitely a smile on his face this time. Rosa stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face. The applause continued, wave after wave of sound. Later, after the concert ended and the crowds dispersed, Rosa stood alone on the stage one more time. She ran her hand along the piano, this beautiful instrument that had given her back a piece of herself. Miguel and Isabella came to walk her home. "Mom," Isabella said as they left the building, "what you did tonight, that was brave." "It wasn't brave," Rosa said. "It was just honest." "That's the same thing," Miguel added. They walked together through the quiet streets. Rosa thought about how much had changed in 6 months. She was still a cleaning lady. She still worried about bills and scraped by on a tight budget. Life was still hard in many ways, but she was also a pianist again, a student, a performer, someone who'd remembered that she was more than just the circumstances life had given her. The story didn't end with a fairy tale transformation. Rosa didn't become a world-famous concert pianist. She didn't suddenly become rich or stop having to work hard every single day. But she did keep studying with Professor Chen. She did perform occasionally at community events and small recitals. And most importantly, she started teaching piano to other immigrants and working parents who thought their own dreams were too far out of reach. Her first student was a single father who worked at a grocery store and used to play guitar in his home country. Her second was a grandmother who'd always wanted to learn but never had the chance. Rosa taught them in borrowed practice rooms and community centers, usually for free or whatever they could afford. She taught them that music didn't belong only to the wealthy or the young. It belonged to anyone who needed it, anyone who felt it, anyone who had the courage to reach for it. Years later, when people asked Rosa about that night when Professor Chen had caught her at the piano, she always said the same thing. "He didn't just force me to play. He forced me to remember who I was. And once you remember that, you can never forget it again." That was the real gift, not the scholarship or the attention or even the music itself. It was the simple truth that you are never just one thing. You are everything you've ever been and everything you've yet to become. And it's never ever too late to find your way back to yourself.